Akashvani. In the program Money Talk, now we bring you a discussion on India's merchandise sector, surpassing services sector in export. The participants are Udyan Ray, economic analyst, and Lalima Nijadang, anchor.
Union Electronics and IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav recently said that for the first time the goods, that is merchandise sector, has surpassed the services sector in export. For more on this, we are now joined by Mr. Udyan Ray. Welcome, Udyan, to the Akashvani studios.
Thank you so much, Lalima.
Udyan, what does this speak about the health of our manufacturing sector? Because we've been tom-tomming about our services sector, saying that we are exporting it. We have a huge, robust IT industry. We are very good on tourism. We have medical tourism, which has picked up over the last few years. And now we are suddenly talking about the merchandise sector.
You're absolutely right. More than half of our GDP, I mean, if our nation's income is 100 rupees, half of it, I think, still comes from services sector, all kinds of services, whether it's financial services, whether it's IT, as you mentioned. But a country as large as India, it also needs to produce goods. Even to deliver services, you will need physical objects, things. So they need to be produced in India for a population as large as India, which has got the top population in the world. The other important thing, Lalima, before I get to the main topic, is that it's worth remembering that when you actually do well in manufacturing and do all kinds of manufacturing, what happens is that itself creates a lot of jobs. So for instance, if you set up a plant, not only are you going to hire workers, there will be also input. If it's a large enough plant, there will be ancillary manufacturing units. There will be people who are providing services, whether it's travel, whether it's boarding, things like mobile repair and so on and so forth. So what happens is there's a multiplier job creation when you create manufacturing jobs. Does the same thing happen in services? Not to that same degree. And therefore, one is, of course, for a large country like ours, and for services, you need physical goods. That's number one. Number two is, if you want to really increase job creation, then manufacturing, which is basically the merchandise area, that is where you will have to focus. Now, what you're mentioning is a very significant development because our services sector was doing well, and therefore we got a reputation, so we were doing exports, and we were almost saying, okay, we do well in services, but we were making do with manufacturing. I'm so glad that things are being turned around, things are being rectified, and there's a lot of emphasis that's going in manufacturing. But the interesting part, Lalima, is this, that in merchandise exports, you also have petroleum products. And we all know, post-pandemic or during the pandemic period, there's a lot of action that happened out there in the petroleum sector. But what has also happened is we'll find in the data that non-petroleum areas are also starting to do well. And one of the most areas which has been in great focus has been electronics. And you will be seeing that is doing well. But the other part, one is, of course, that in the merchandise exports, it's crossed services sector. It's not as if services sector is doing badly. Within our country, we have these capability centers, BPOs, KPOs kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they are doing very well. We are offshoring kind of at the client country, or that is facing a challenge for various reasons. The AI's, artificial intelligence transformations that are going on. So everybody is reworking in the West. But coming back here in terms of merchandise, this non-petroleum areas, they are beginning to do well. And there are some areas which are standing out. A lot of it is thanks to some of the incentives that are being given, PLI kind of schemes and other schemes. And that's an ongoing process. It's going to keep going on. So that's probably showing up a little bit. And when you start inviting other people to manufacture in the country, then what happens is you don't manufacture for only your country, but you manufacture for the world. So like 20 years back, it was unthinkable that cars and automobiles would be, two-wheelers and four-wheelers would be manufactured in India and exported to this volume, this degree. So those things are also happening. And of course, we have in merchandise exports, we have our strengths, especially in pharmaceuticals and all kinds of pharmaceuticals, whether it's bulk drugs or formulations and other variants. So that was already a very globalized kind of an industry to begin with. So there we are doing well. But some of the standouts are electronic space, and that's number one. The other part, Lalima, worth pointing out, the merchandise exports were not doing so well all through, but now month on month they are showing a growth. So not only that exceeding part over services has happened, but there's a steady growth. So there was a period of degrowth, but that is happening. Now the key part will be now to make sure that we keep moving ahead and there's no going back. And we made
keep the momentum up.
Keep the momentum up, yeah.
So we didn't rest on our laurels that, okay, our services sector is going good and the exports are good, so that's it. We moved on to improve our manufacturing systems. It's heartening to note that so far we always talked about petroleum products as being the largest exports. Now we are moving on to gem jewellery, textiles, manufacturing, phones in India. That certainly boosts confidence, Udyan, amongst not just the retail investors, but also the domestic investors and the citizens that, okay, we are going ahead. And we can see that the Sensex now crossing 70,000 mark is a sign of this confidence, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Laliman. There are other very positive things that happen. The automobiles, laptops,
yes,
and a lot of Indian manufacturers are teaming up with other players and manufacturing it for them. So that's number one. There are other very beneficial things happen. If you look engineering colleges, now the number one destination in terms of jobs has been for many, many years in getting into the IT services, whether it's computer engineering and computer engineering jobs and getting into services. It's not manufacturing. You know what it does is success stories. What it does is it spawns more success stories.
Yes.
So when you have a role model, it's a success story, it spawns more success stories. So when you're making manufacturing cool and happening, when you're getting the latest plants and people getting to see things, leading manufacturers of the world are coming in here and trying to cater to this large population that we have, the world's largest population that we have. So what happens is you will have more and more people wanting to be getting into manufacturing jobs. So the number of people who will be doing, say, mechanical engineering or other kinds of engineering, which probably were right there even in the past, but they were not finding favor. You'll find more and more people wanting to do that. So some of those rectifications will also happen. To produce goods, world-class merchandise, not only do you need world-class plants, but you also need world-class manpower. Also, you need a very large supply of manpower. So experts have pointed out that we also need to have that quality of manpower. So first you need to invest so that so many people come out, and they need to be of that level so that they can team up with the machines and machinery and the systems, global systems, to produce world-class products. So lots of good things will come out, and when you're producing world-class stuff, then it'll show up on your export figures.
Yes, and India does plan to increase the share of manufacturing in GDP to 25% from 15% at present. And as you just mentioned, Udyan, the ease of doing business, the markings have gone up, our rankings have gone up, and we have the world's third largest startup system now here. And now we are creating that ecosystem where innovation is being encouraged. We are spending more on R&D and so on and so forth. So this kind of creates an ecosystem where we are focusing more on, as the Prime Minister says, that zero defect. That kind of production must happen, which will of course lead to better exports. We also see a shift there that we are also exporting agricultural products to UAE, and as you said, moving beyond just petroleum products. What about the fact that some glitches that may happen, angel investors, people who are starting up startups, are we geared up to fine-tune the people involved in manufacturing through policy making and through taxation?
That will be an ongoing process, and sometimes when you're setting up a world-class facility, you need to have the right policy. You also need to have right infrastructure. So if you want to produce semiconductors in India, then you must have lots of good water supply, good power supply. So those things will have to be ensured, and I'm sure that those are being done. But as we are talking about this, I thought it's worth mentioning to you, Lalima, that the mix that you're talking about, the petroleum and gems and jewelry, marine products, these are all traditional areas. And now I see that changing. If you see the electronics, that is the part which is showing a lot of growth. But I wish to point out to some other areas where I see lots of interesting things happening. So where the startups have come in. So you can, in the future, expect India to be exporting things moving around green mobility. So electronic vehicles, batteries, those EVs. Because when you're going to be producing in such a large scale for India, naturally you'll be, producing global scale. That's number one. Number two is defense. That's another area where we're doing well. And they may not be cutting edge technologies that we might produce, but rugged things like vehicles, munitions. So things which are hardcore stuff, which is where capacities don't exist globally. India might just be there. So these are some of the areas that you would see. Space would be another area.
Exactly.
Where I think about 200 space startups have come up. So those are the areas that you will see. You will see Indian for commercial and military purpose drones. So it's going to change. And what's going to happen is, Lalima, what has been the challenge for us is that we have been exporting items which are commodities in nature, broadly speaking, and they face a pricing pressure. But when you start going up the value chain, which every country which has done well, we start doing that and we see the stuff happening on the ground. You will see these export figures going up, employment going up, and people's perception of made in India products. They're already showing up in various places, but made in India products will start showing up in different places. And once that reputation is built, then there's no looking back. You just keep moving ahead and ahead. So that's number one in terms of going up the value chain. And also geographical distribution. There's only a certain number of countries that we are exporting. The US takes a lion's share of our exports. Then there's, as you mentioned, UAE, then there's Singapore and all that. But we will obviously have to diversify and try and make sure that, it's spread out so that it's also geostrategically important also. So with a lot of these FTAs and other things, you can expect that to happen.
When we talk about exports, a few years ago, nobody would have thought that India would be exporting coaches abroad, would be exporting defense material abroad, but we are doing it and we're doing pretty well. This has also then led to an increase in jobs, as you just mentioned. Also, it's not just one particular plant is set up, it's the ancillary, the secondary and tertiary ring of employment which is happening. Does that also augur well for our country?
Oh, absolutely. It's not as if, Lalima, we were not exporting. We had this whole culture of MSMEs producing merchandise items for people abroad. So we have exported to, say, what was the erstwhile USSR, we have exported to Africa. But when you are doing at a global scale, if you really, really want to be at top-notch quality, then that game is a little different. So that dovetails very nicely with all the made in India kind of plans where you want to be part of the global supply chain.
And you have to have a competitive edge because you are competing with the best in the global.
So then what happens is then you're not looking at a particular market and being happy with the market. So you're not just looking at some certain number of countries in Africa because you think that you will not be able to compete in the Europe and US and all that. You are so confident that you think that you should be able to service every market. So when you do it at a global scale and the ecosystem that you're talking about, that's where the job creation is going to be happening. Before we have, say, a Ludhiana and places in the south where, garment exports happen. But when you do it at a very large scale, at a global scale, it'll start meaning very different things. And you'll probably have very, very large sort of outfits who are doing this merchandise sort of exports.
So the government's efforts, big or small, whether it was the policy decision or it was steps like opening a GEM portal, which has done tremendously well, and of course, screwing up and tightening up the reform sector. GST is one of them and many other policy decisions. They've all moved in the direction of making our country self-sufficient and also exporting stuff. So all that has, I think now we are seeing the fruit of all those efforts.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Udayan, for being with us and throwing light on the fact that merchandise sector is now doing very well as far as exports are concerned and surpassing the services sector, which probably very few would have imagined a few years ago. Thank you very much, Udayan.
Thank you so much.
You were listening to a discussion on India's merchandise sector, surpassing services sector in export. The participants were Udyan Ray, economic analyst, and Lalima Nejadang, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.